So, thank you, Yuljan, for that very comprehensive introduction that briefly covers the basics of Git, GitHub arrays, functions, data types, and variables, as well as the basics in writing, compiling, and running C programs using code blocks. And to introduce yet another alternative tool for writing C programs, I'm going to give you a quick tour to a cloud-based IDE called CS50. And just like code blocks, we can write, compile, and run C programs using it. But the main difference is that it runs on the server, which means you don't need to download it. All you need is a GitHub account to log in and save your written programs or progress. And in the next 15 minutes, 15-20 minutes or so, this is the IDE we'll be utilizing to make you feel more comfortable using it alongside the succeeding topics that I will be discussing concisely. And so to give you a brief summary of this, let's create an account by signing up with our GitHub account since familiar mo gamay ani, and you should create one if you still don't have it. And then right after we usually do in an IDE. So here we can create a file called hello world. Hello world. That's C, followed by the file extension C. And in here we can write the conventional code for a C program. H main void hello world. Okay, right after you save it, you can compile it. Hello world.c slash that out, and as you can see, it printed the string hello world. And so for our next topic, we will be tackling yet another crucial aspect in C, the operators. So supposed to be all in all, there are 5 categories of operators in C, but for now, we're only going to discuss 3 of them. And since it's better jud nga before mo proceed in tackling more advanced topics, mas ma-familiarize ninyo or mas confident mo una in using and applying the basics or fundamentals. And so for the first of this, we have the arithmetic operators, where 7 primary mathematical operations are included. Diri makita nato kung unsaon nato pag-implement ani nga mga operators under the C programming standards. So by looking at the table here, we can see brief descriptions of how each of these operators are used. And by taking a closer look at the presented examples here, we can see a little clearer how each is written and implemented in C. And by using CS50 IDE, we can run this code and see what it does. Okay, let's paste that and compile this. So as you can see here that by adding the integers x and y, we get 28. By subtracting x by y, we get 8. By multiplying them, we get 180. By dividing, we get 1. And by applying the modulo operator, we get 8 for our answer. While since we are obtaining the remainder when we divide these two variables. Also, the increment of x printed 19, while the decrement of y yielded 9. This is because incrementing a value means adding 1 to it, whereas decrementing 1 means subtracting 1 to it. So that sums up entirely the concept of arithmetic operations. Next, we have the relational operators, where 6 primary mathematical operations are included. Kani sila ang mag-determine obviously sa relations between two variables or operands. Under the makita nato ang mga operators capable of checking whether two values are equal. not equal, greater than, or equal to, as well as lesser than or equal to. So basically, when we are performing relational operations, ang output jud ana is either true or false, represented by the two numerical values 1 and 0 respectively. Then again, makita nato sa atong table diri ang 6 relational operators alongside their concise descriptions or usage. And the following is our sample code where we used and implemented such operators and actual C programming code. And to see this more comprehensively in action, let's compile and run this block of code in CS50 and see what it yields. Okay, let's compile this. Let's run this again. Okay. By applying the not so the remakit, so we can clearly see that by applying the equal to operator to the variables we just initialized, we get 0 or false. By applying the not equal to operator to the same variables in order, it outputs 1 or true. And while by using the lesser than operator, it yields 0 or false. And by applying the greater than operator, we get 1 or true as an output. And lastly, for our lesser than or equal to and greater than or equal to, we get 0 or false and 1 or true respectively, using yet again the same variables in order. So one thing you might have noticed is that the relational operators are more reliant on your ability to determine the logic between two values. Dili ito kailangan og prior programming knowledge para makabaluta nga mas dako ang 18 sa 10. And so mao nang syntax ang jud dapat atong i-consider. And with that out of the way, we can now briefly discuss the logical operators. So sa ani na category, there are 3 mathematical operations we can perform, and ang usage niya ni mostly is for Boolean expressions. So to have a firmer grasp on what this does, let's take a quick look at the following example codes and use this 50 once again to see more clearly these operations in action. So here we paste that code, we recompile it, and rerun the program. So just like using relational operators, we get either 1 or 0 for our output. And by compiling this block of code, running this block of code, and by using the AND operator, we get an output of 0 or false, giving us the initial idea that only will this operator yield 1 or true if both operands are also 1 or true. And next we have an output of 1 when using the OR operator, using the same variables since it evaluates 1 or true if at least one of the operands is 1 or true. And finally, the NOT operator, this exclamation mark obviously yields the opposite logical state of what your operand currently has. In this case, it outputs 0 or false when applied to x and 1 or true when applied to y. So since naa na mo'y sufficient knowledge regarding operators, data types, variables, arrays, and functions, pwede na tamo proceed sa conditional statements. And so basically by formal definition, conditional statements are the primary ways for a program to execute and make decisions. Since isa sa mga main aims sa programming kay automation, then importante kayo na ma-familiarize ni nato nga aspects sa programming because this part determines how efficient and dynamic your program and application will be. And para masabtan nato unsaon pag-write sa code ani under the standards of C, let's take a brief look at the following example. And just like the previous topics, use CS50 to compile and run the exact set lines of code. So the basic structure of a conditional if statement in C is observed through the sample code. And as you can see here, we have 3 sections: the if, else if, and else, where if is mandatory while else if and else are optional. Now we'll proceed in analyzing our next example by applying and apply what we know so far about Boolean expressions, run this code in CS50 and see even more comprehensively how they are implemented and what they do. So, mm, so ito na siya i-copy, i-paste natin siya sa atong CS50 IDE. Okay, so you can see makita na to dihi na ni-output siya og string nga 9 is less than 10. So basically what your program will first do is evaluate the expression inside the if keyword. 9 is greater than 10, and if that's evaluated as true, then it will execute whatever code is included within its curly braces. Otherwise, it will not then proceed in evaluating the expression inside the else if keyword. The 9 is lesser than 10. And then again, if that's evaluated as true, which in our case it did, then it will execute the statements included within its succeeding curly braces. By doing so, it printed the string 9 is less than 10. Otherwise, if none of the specified conditions are true, then it will execute whatever is included in the curly braces that succeeds the else keyword. Okay, now since you are probably more familiar with operators and conditional statements than you are before, it's time for you to have a quick overview of loops in C. So, by technical definition, loops are statements that allow us to execute lines or blocks of code for a certain number of times. Basically, instead of writing redundant executions that span several lines, you can just make use of loops, and in this tutorial, we will be tackling the two of them, namely for and while loops. And to further demonstrate how they work, we'll look at how they are structured, see the things they are capable of, and how one differs from the other. And with that out of the way, we can now first take a quick close look at the for loop given the example here. So as you can see here, sa pag-implement nato og for loop sa C, you need to type the keyword for, followed by the parenthesis. Then sa sulod ani niya is ang three expressions na dapat nato i-specify: the initial value, condition, and the operation. And each of these sections is separated by a semicolon. Then right after ana nila, you can just add your statements or mga code nga gusto nimo ma-execute right after each successful iteration. Okay, to make sense out of this, ang initial value ang mag-determine kung asa magsugod og iterate, ang condition ang mag-determine kung mag-iterate pa ba, og ang operation ang mag-determine kung unsa ang mahitabo sa initial value after each iteration. And so for our first example here, we set the initial value of the loop to 0. We continue the loop as long as the initial value is I is less than 10. And after each iteration, we add 1 to I. And to see this more in action, we can execute this exact line of code to our CS50 IDE here and recompile it and rerun it. Okay. So as you can see, ni-print siya og 1 to 9. So pag gamit kag for loop and you use this kind of use the exact same syntax, maka-output yun mag 1 to 9 since iya mang i-print ang value, i-print ang value. And applying the same principle to the second example, you can see that we started iterating at 10. We continue the loop if I is greater than 0, and after each iteration we subtract 1, 2, I, and if we run this exact lines of code, save that, recompile this, and rerun this, you get this output. It printed 9 to 1 since each iteration get deductment sa value sa ato initial value. So, similarly, while loops follow the same logic, ang nakalahi lang is walay intended nga kabot nga atong initial value. And kita pa dapat ang mabuhat ana the same, and the same goes for the operation. Ang dapat ra jud nimo specify sa while loops is ang condition. So looking at our first example here, we manually initialized our loop at 0, contained by the variable counter. We continue the loop as long as the counter is less than or equal to 10, and after each iteration at danatog 1 C counter. And if we run this exact line of code, we get this result. Okay, so that wraps up our brief tutorial about operators, conditional statements, and loop. And I hope that you picked up a few good ideas of how things are done in C. And so for your activity, okay, now I want you all to make a GitHub account. If you don't have one, then right after, I want you all to go to cs50.io and use your GitHub account to sign up and log in. And once you're there, I want you all to make a file name odd integers followed by .c, and within that C file, I want you to make a function that accepts an array of integers with a presupposed size of 5 as its input, and use a for loop to or any other loop or any of the two loops that we discussed to traverse through it and print out the double of each of the elements inside that array, each separated by a space. So if you have an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it must print out 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You can see the same, you can use the same array as it is cased. And once you're done, I want you all to take a screenshot and send it to this Google Drive link with your complete name. You will be given 10 minutes to do this, and right after that, this Google Drive link will no longer accept responses. So good luck, Marito.